Grace and peace, lovely people. It is so great to have you back with me. This is Straight Up with Nate, and I'm Nate. So, to get straight up into it, bitterness. Bitterness is an experience in which we've all been through it, we've all dealt with it, we've all had to deal with bitter experiences, and, do understand that when we're talking about bitterness, bitterness is not simply an emotion, it is not simply just something you go through, it is a life lesson. When I say this, I do want people to understand that bitterness is something in which we all have to grow from, develop from, in order for us to grow as people. And I think a lot of the times when we talk about bitterness, we don't see how much bitterness can affect us as people. I'm also going to speak of my own personal experiences pertaining to bitterness, but I can also speak about bitterness as it pertains to other people. Now, the thing about bitterness is that it is a trying experience. Sometimes bitterness can affect you to the point where now you are going through moments and times where bitterness is, running your life. And this is not to say that if you are bitter, that you're bad people, you won't get better. It doesn't get any better, no. But what I will say is that pertaining to bitterness, sometimes the reason why people are bitter is because of either an injustice, personal experiences, someone was treated unfairly, something was done unfairly to that person. Some situations may have happened where the person now is bitter towards either people or experiences. Life changes. Now, I do want people to know that in order for us to grow as people, we have to understand that bitterness is only but for a moment, a time, for a season. When we're working towards bitterness, I do want people to understand that we all have our moments where we're going to be bitter. And what's important for us is to have people to hold us accountable, and as well as people who can be real with us and tell us that, we're dealing with bitter moments. And at times, I'll speak for myself, I went through years of bitterness, years of frustration with people, frustration with myself, frustration with other people, because I'll be honest and say that I dealt with being treated unfairly, being treated poorly, treated as though I was unwanted, treated as though I was the problem, treated as though I wasn't good enough. This is not to say that people are bad, and I'm not going to sit there and point the finger and say that it's other people's fault. The truth of the matter is, some bitter experiences are only due to personal perception, personal response, personal difficulty. Now, when we're talking about bitterness, it is important to understand that we also work through unforgiveness. We also work through that time where we have to forgive those who are causing us to have bitter experiences. And unfortunately, we're going to deal with a lot of those people. Some of those people are our family, our friends, boyfriend, girlfriend, and some of those people are also going to be our grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles. And in the same manner, is not to say that they're bad people, but sometimes they do things that will cause us to be bitter. Whether they call us a name, something, put us in a situation that we would never want to be in, with situations that are just not in our favor. Now, when we talk about dealing with bitter experiences, it is our job to know what makes us bitter. It is your job as a person to understand how to work through your bitterness. And when you work through your bitterness, it is such a relieving feeling. And when I say this, in order for you to work through your bitter feelings, you have to recognize that you're bitter first. And I'll speak for myself. Recognizing bitterness can be difficult. And why I say that is because when you've dealt with bitter experiences, bitter circumstances, changes that are happening around in your life, at times you look at yourself and you say, am I good enough? I'm ready to forgive that person who did me wrong. Ready to forgive the person who went behind my back and said this. Ready to forgive the person who spoke a certain way towards me that set me on this path in the first place. Whether, like I said, whether it be a family member, whether it be somebody you know, or some experience that may have happened, whether it be even a professor from school or someone who you pass by on the street, you have to recognize where bitterness can seep in. Now, me as a person, I had to work through a lot of bitterness. I'm not afraid to talk about it. I was bitter for years, and this had nothing to do with my parents, certain situations that took place. And for me, I had to recognize my own bitterness within myself. And unfortunately, it led to me lashing out at people, taking my frustrations out on the wrong people. It led to me having to say things that I should not have said. It led to me having to make decisions that I was not supposed to make prematurely. When we're talking about unforgiveness, I do want people to know that there's joy in dealing with bitterness, in dealing with unforgiveness, in dealing with situations that have happened that are not in our favor. We see situations where the person is just not even sorry, and that can make us bitter. I want to encourage someone and say, when you deal with people who are not prepared to say sorry, that is an aspect of immaturity on their part. The thing you have to understand is that when they refuse to say sorry for anything that they have done, that has nothing to do with you. That has nothing to do with what you did wrong. That has nothing to do with what you didn't do. That has nothing to do with what you did do. What that has to do with is the person who did whatever they did, and they have to acknowledge that they did it wrong. And unfortunately, another issue that does come up with bitterness is the fact that the person who did whatever they did, they're not prepared to say sorry, or they don't say it at all. The thing you have to recognize is that the people who do you wrong, or the people who make you bitter, they don't control your life. You control your life. You have to be prepared to say, I'm not going to let bitterness seep in. I'm not going to let bitterness be the ruler of my heart. I'm not going to let bitterness be the very thing that causes me to turn away the people I love, the person that I love, and ruin my experiences. The thing you have to develop as a person is also understanding that bitterness is something in which you have to recognize that if we're going to grow, some people will do things, and we have to recognize when bitterness wants to seep in and how to prevent it from doing so. Now, I will speak for myself and say that I've been bullied for years, and bullying is not something that I would ever wish upon anyone. I don't encourage bullying. And one thing I always tell people, I'm like, if you did feel that I bullied you, or I made you feel uncomfortable, or I made you feel small, come to me, and I'll be the person to acknowledge that, yeah, I was wrong. I was young, I did wrong, I said wrong, I acted wrong. And so in that regard, I do want people to understand that bitterness, we all go through it. We've all dealt with bitter experiences, but the question is, how do you grow from it? How do you develop? Bitterness, how I would explain it, is a type of, like, you know how you have your arm and there's some type of rod sticking through it, and metaphorically, it's corroded, it's rusted, it's messed up, it's deformed, and it's going through your arm. That's what bitterness is. Bitterness makes you sick. I can speak for myself and say that when I was dealing with bitterness, it bothered me a lot. I used to hold on to bitterness as if bitterness was a best friend. I used to hold on to bitterness as if it was a best friend. And that was bad, because I had to understand that some of the people who did me wrong, or the frustration that was holding on to me, or what I was dealing with, is not a product of me. It's not a product of something I did wrong. It's a product of people's egos. It's a product of certain circumstances that I didn't understand yet. It was a product of certain circumstances that I did not perceive or was not prepared for. So when we're talking about bitterness, it is just something that we have to grow from, something we have to deal with, something we have to develop from. And so when we're dealing with bitterness and situations, my encouragement is this: recognize first what you are dealing with. Recognize first that you are bitter. Recognize that, yes, you're hurt. Recognize that you are dealing with certain circumstances that are just not in your favor. And in the same manner, find people who will hold you accountable. And I'm not just talking about friends, people who recognize your spirit, recognize your true self. Because I had to get people around me who know my kind-hearted nature. There's times where, yeah, I can be mean. I can be cold-hearted. But that is because of a root of bitterness that I had to deal with. Most people who know me will say that I'm kind, I'm cool. Great. But I had to get around people who know my nature. I had a good friend who came to me and said, Nate, this is not you. I know you're not an angry person. I know you're not a person who likes to be bitter. I know you're a person who likes to crack jokes and laugh and do so much. Let's get you back there. And she had to be the one to counsel me, love on me, and guide me through a whole bunch of situations and help me to deal with certain circumstances. And it wasn't just one person. It was my mentors. It was my friends. It was people who I loved, people who cared for me, people who looked out for me. They helped me see a different perspective so that I can be able to live a life that I'm not dealing with bitterness, unforgiveness. I'm not dealing with irritations in my life. And now I look at life where now I get to smile a lot. I get to enjoy life. I get to sing a lot more. And I'm not singing because from a place of anger, or singing from a place of frustration. I'm not singing from a place where I know I'm happy for me. I'm happy from what I've been through. I'm happy that now, because of what I've been through, I'm no longer bitter. I'm no longer dealing with certain circumstances. Now I have a different outlook on life. I love you. I hope to see you guys next week. Leave a comment, subscribe, share, pass on the message. I'm here to encourage everybody. Let me know, send your questions, send your thoughts, send anything that you think needs to be discussed, and I'm gonna pass it on. By all means, see you guys next week.